All right, let's dive right into today's explainer. We are looking at a genuinely fascinating piece of sartorial history that has suddenly found itself squarely in the middle of a very intense, very modern debate. We're talking about the Bandgala suit. Now, for decades, this highly structured, high-collar jacket has basically been the absolute pinnacle of Indian formal wear. But recently, a real mystery has popped up. Is this iconic, quintessentially Indian garment actually a relic of British colonial rule? Okay, so the controversy really kicked off when India's railway minister, Ashwini Vaishnav, made a pretty sweeping announcement. He declared that the black prince coats, which are the Bandgala jackets worn by railway officials, would be discontinued immediately. He explicitly linked the garment to the British Raj, saying it represents a colonial mindset that basically needs to be banished from the institution's dressing styles.
And that brings us to the million-dollar question. Is the Bandgala actually a colonial relic? To figure this out, we can't just look at today's politics. We actually have to embark on a historical detective story that spans 4 centuries. We're going to trace the threads of this jacket from the grand imperial courts of the 16th century, straight through the deserts of Rajasthan, over to the tailoring hubs in London, and then finally back to modern India.
So here is our roadmap for today. 1. The railway controversy. 2. Mughal court origins. 3. Rajput equestrian evolution. 4. British era and global tailoring. And 5. Post-colonial identity.
Part 1. The railway controversy. Let's unpack the ministry's rationale first. This decision is part of a much broader decolonization drive by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's administration, and the stated goal is to identify and remove institutional vestiges of British imperial rule. Because the Indian Railways adopted the Black Bandgala during the British period in the late 19th century, state actors view it as this lingering connection to colonial hierarchies. But, there's also a highly practical, totally non-political element here, too. The heavy, structured Bandgala is notoriously uncomfortable for staff working in the blistering 45-degree heat of an Indian summer. So getting rid of it provides some serious practical relief. On the flip side, though, this decree has faced immediate pushback. Cultural historians, designers, and descendants of royal lineages are arguing that labeling the Bandgala a colonial relic is just historically inaccurate. They're quick to point out that the garment's structural roots actually predate British rule by centuries. Critics argue it represents a really profound indigenous synthesis, and by banning it, the government risks erasing actual Indian history in its rush to erase colonial history. Plus, some critics are suggesting that true decolonization should probably focus on systemic issues rather than banning a garment that's already so widely integrated.
All right, Part 2. Mughal court origins. To find the earliest structural ancestor of the Bandgala, we have to travel way back to the Jama. Emerging in the imperial courts of the Mughal Empire, especially under Emperor Akbar in the 16th century, the Jama was this long, tunic-like outer robe. It had a very tight-fitting upper bodice attached to a full, flared skirt that draped beautifully down below the knees. Crucially, the high, closed neckline of the Jama was designed to project bodily discipline, modesty, and imperial authority. It was double-breasted, wrapping across the chest, and, get this, it was secured at the side with soft fabric ties or slips. So keep in mind, this soft, wraparound fastening existed long before rigid buttons ever came into the picture. Let's track how this look actually morphed over the centuries. In the 16th century, you have the flowing jama. Then, moving to the 17th century under Emperor Jahangir, we see the introduction of the sadri, which was a quilted, front-open winter vest used for layering. Into the 18th century, the jama gradually evolved into the angraka. It kept that padded structure but featured asymmetrical ties across the chest. Finally, in the 19th century, we arrive at the achkan. The achkan was a form-fitting knee-length coat that completely ditched the fabric ties for center front buttons, those little fabric buttons called gundis. It took that closed-neck dignity of the older robes and gave it a much sharper, structured vertical line.
Part 3. The Rajput Equestrian Evolution. So, as the Rathore rulers of Marwar, which is modern-day Jodhpur, entered into imperial Mughal service, a really profound aesthetic shift happened. The knee-length achkan looked elegant, sure, but imagine trying to swing a polo mallet or mount a charging horse in a restrictive knee-length coat. Yeah, it simply didn't work. To facilitate this highly active, martial lifestyle, local tailors in Jodhpur radically adapted the garment. They cropped the achkan right up to the waist,
narrowed the torso for a snug equestrian fit, and paired it with tight-fitting riding breeches, which the world now knows as Jodhpurs. This brilliant functional adaptation is what gave birth to the classic Jodhpuri silhouette. Now, what's really interesting here is that when you look at this 400-year progression, you can see a direct, unbroken lineage. We go from the side-tying ankle-length jama meant for strict court etiquette, to the asymmetrical knee-length angrakha, to the center-buttoned knee-length ahkan used in administration, and finally down to the center-buttoned waist-length bandgala, perfectly tailored for the saddle. The evolution is absolutely clear, and it is deeply, undeniably indigenous.
Part 4. British Era and Global Tailoring. Cut to the 1930s. The immense glamour of Jodhpur's polo teams traveling to London for international matches really caught the eye of the Western aristocracy. Tailors on London's famous Savile Row started refining the construction of the Indian jacket, using highly structured Western tailoring techniques. We're talking about adding crisp, padded shoulders to create a clean, authoritative chest line, and expertly set-in sleeves for a bespoke fit. But it is absolutely crucial to understand this was a process of mutual refinement, a perfect example of indigenous modernity. The British did not invent this jacket and force it upon India. Instead, global tailoring simply elevated a firmly established Indian design. Oh, and let's quickly clear up a major sartorial misconception while we're at it. The Bandgala is so often confused with the narrow jacket, but they serve completely different purposes. The Bandgala is highly structured, full-sleeved, and waist-length, defined by its padding and aristocratic formality. The narrow jacket, on the other hand, actually evolved from the traditional vest. It's sleeveless, hip-length, and became a symbol of a more populist, democratic civilian identity. So they are entirely distinct branches of the exact same family tree. Designer Raghavendra Rathore, who actually descends from the Jodhpur royal family, by the way, sums this up perfectly. He notes that while the jacket definitely absorbed some Western tailoring structure and colonial military trims, he says it has developed and evolved over 4 centuries. The jacket itself always remained Indian. It really is India's most refined expression of royal tailoring, existing long before the British ever set foot in Calcutta.
Part 5. Post-colonial identity. And here is the incredible irony of calling the Bandgala a colonial relic today. It totally ignores what went down in 1947. Early Indian nationalists actually reclaimed the garment for the exact opposite reason. They enthusiastically embraced the Bandgala specifically to reject Western cultural dominance. By adopting it as the standard attire for diplomats and cabinet ministers, they basically threw out the Western necktie and the 3-piece suit. And the Indian Railways deliberately kept the Bandgala as a proud, formal symbol of a newly sovereign state's discipline and gravity. But, at the end of the day, history has to make room for practical reality. As the heavy Bandgala is phased out of the railways today, it's not just disappearing into thin air. The ministry is piloting new, lightweight, color-coded operational gear instead. They're prioritizing modern efficiency, on-site safety, high visibility, and crucially, actual comfort for the staff working out there on the ground. The uniform is simply modernizing to fit the relentless, everyday operational needs of the 21st century. Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to wrap up. As institutions modernize and shed the past, how exactly do we define heritage? Should national identity be defined by a search for pre-colonial purity, just discarding anything touched by external influence? Or is true heritage found in centuries of cultural synthesis, where a garment can start in a Mughal court, adapt for Rajput warriors, get perfectly structured on Savile Row, and still remain quintessentially, undeniably Indian? It is a brilliant question about what it means to be connected in a global world, and I hope this explainer gave you some historical context to ponder it. Thanks so much for joining me today.